Okay, we're back. I have knitted 4 rows, which I counted on my row counter, and that's adequate for a nice brim. And as you remember, we did knit 1, purl 1, and we've done 4 rows, and we're going to start the body of our hat. If you wanted to, you could continue with this yarn, and we're just going to do all front stitches, or you can make a color change. So let's assume you're going to make a color change, and you're going to put your stitch marker over here like always, and go ahead and cut this first yarn. Now, take your new yarn and easier said than done. Oh, little devil. There it is. I should have done this ahead of time. Okay, take your new yarn and take the tail of your yarn and go through the stitch where this other yarn is going, the tail that you just cut. So just give yourself a little space with your finger, take the tip of your yarn, tail of your yarn, and put it through where your other tail is. Now begin knitting, but be careful not to pull it too much or you'll pull it back through. You're going to weave this in when you're done with the hat. So you want to leave yourself, you know, what is that, about a foot or 18 inches. So now begin your next row, and you're going to do the body as all front stitches because that's the easiest. So take off your next stitch and make a front stitch. You can see that was where you'd done a front stitch before. Pipe it, but don't pull too hard because you'll pull the tail out. You don't want to do that. Now, go ahead, if you want to, and take these 2 tails and tuck them inside the hat so they're out of your way. Take off your next stitch. That was where you had done a back stitch, but we're starting the body of the hat now, so you want to just do them all as front stitches. And again, don't pull too tightly on this. I also want to show you something. When you take off this next stitch, and again, the hat's going to be kind of poking out this way now, out towards the end of your knees. Take your stitch off, and you'll see that when you take this off, it's going to tighten up that previous stitch. So you want to snug your yarn a little bit, but most of the tightening of the stitches, see, occurs when you remove the next stitch in order to knit it. And now you're just going to do the entire row as front stitches, and you're going to do all the subsequent rows the same way. And again, you can do it this way. I think it's the fastest to hold the working yarn in your right hand. Whoops. It's got to go back up like that. If you drop it, just know that's what you got to do. Or if you find your wrist getting a little sore, again, just take the stitch off and lay it over the working yarn and either hook it with one of your fingers or just pull it like this and pipe it. From time to time you're going to want to push these around and you'll have some stretch in the yarn. So or again, this is another way to do it. So the yarn looks just like this and put it on the other side like that. Either way will work. You don't have to have a death grip on this knitting hoop, but maybe that's what we'll call it, a knitting hoop. Maybe we'll have named that knitting technique contest. And you're going to work all your rows this way. So let's pretend that we have now worked this hat for many rows. And again, after each row, be sure you move your stitch marker over. Now, eventually, this is going to get fairly long, and you want the body of this, depending on the size of the individual you are making the hat for. For a man, you might want this to come out, 10 inches or so. between the edge of this and the edge of the pipe. So you're going to measure this. I stopped my hat at 8.5, and that was plenty for me. So let's assume for a moment you've actually done, and you've continued in this manner, round and round, and you'll see as it starts coming out, it will look like stockinette fabric, just like any of these hats. That will be the side that faces you. It'll look like this, if you will. So when you have completed as deep as you want, and for my size I only needed 8.5 inches, you are now going to knit 2 together for your last row. So just as always, you have your stitch marker on the right, the working yarn is on the right. So now you're going to take off, we're going to assume that I've knitted 8.5 inches for my size, and you adjust it for yourself. So take off your first stitch and put it over your working yarn. Now take off another stitch and put it over your working yarn. You are knitting 2 together, pull up your working yarn and pipe it. I'm not going to tell you to take 2 stitches off at once because it's very difficult to do it that way. I think it's easier to have the working yarn in your hand, take off 1 stitch at a time. But remember, you're knitting 2 together, and it's always abbreviated K, K2, the number 2, T-O-G. So off comes another stitch. You're going to be reducing the number of stitches. This is just a simple shaping to the crown. It's not going to be form-fitting to your head, but it will look better when you bind it off. And just take 1 at a time. Make sure that when you take your stitch off and put it over your working yarn, that when you take off the first one, push your working yarn through there a good amount so that you have room to take your second stitch over. Again, this is a little awkward, but you will finish your hat in about 1.5 hours, and I think that's pretty good. I can't make a hat any other way that fast. And you can stick it in your purse. You could do it on the bus on the way to work. And you're going to do this all the way around. So, for example, we only put on 24 stitches. When you're done, you'll have 12. And, they're going to really space out here on this plastic tubing. So, you might find that for a little child's hat, you might want shorter tubing. You'll see the problem compounds itself in terms of the size of the tube when we get into other type of shaping. But you're just going to do that all the way around for the whole row. Again, make sure you always cast on an even number of stitches, even if you're going to do the whole thing in stockinette, because you need to knit 2 together for your end, for the top of your hat, the crown. Okay, we have 2 stitches left. Put your finger through there. Off they come. Excuse me. Okay, now all you would have to do is cut your yarn, which I don't really want to do at this point because I just started this. Oh, well, it's all right. It's easier to show you this way. All right, so cut your yarn, leave yourself a good tail. Put on your knitting needle, your darning needle, and now take your stitch marker off. You don't need that anymore. So here's your end of your tail, your working yarn, that is, not your tail, but the end of your working yarn you just cut. And take that now and weave through, come over here to the other side, and take this through those stitches. Might just only be able to take 3 at a time. And come all the way around your hat, the crown of your hat. You're going to do this before you take it off the pipe, because that way you won't lose any of your stitches. See what I'm doing? I'm just coming under those stitches, coming all the way around, not worrying about gathering it at this point. Now I've gone through all my stitches. Now just take your hat off. Of course, this isn't really going to look like a hat, but you get the idea. And pull. Now, this is the right side of your hat. It looks like a little monkey hat. That'd be so cute. Alright. take your yarn now, go right through the center, assuming you were finished. Pull it down after you've pulled tight to gather, and you'll see that's the center of the crown, and now you can just weave in your ends. And by the way, I learned something recently from a knitting book, from somebody who knows. I always had been told, never split your yarn, even when you're weaving in, and this woman says, no, go through the yarn. And you know what? That really does hold it. So, especially a bulky yarn like this and loose stitching, it's not going to stay in any other way. And then I still take this through, again, bring it through, I make a knot. I don't know if that's really necessary. And then you can cut it. And that's how you would end the hat. And make sure that you go back in here, these two places, give them a little tug, make sure they haven't loosened up. And you have to weave these in. This is where you made your color change. It won't be perfect, but it will look just fine. And when you weave this in, weave it into the green, weave this into the purple so your tails don't show. And be sure you weave in your original tail, which is where you started. And that's how you make a hat. And before we close, now my pipe has cooled, and you can see there's a couple bubbles here in the end, and it's all rough and skanky. So you're going to take your tubing cutter now. You want to make sure you don't cut into the wire, and you want to leave enough, you can bend it, you want to leave enough that the wire isn't going to be poking out the end. But you want to have enough on the tail to go over and beyond the edge of this cutter. And now, just cut that. Be really careful with these. Cut your finger off. Whoops. Okay, so you make sure you don't cut your wire. Have it straight in there. And boom. Now you have a nice, even edge that won't snag your yarn. And you can bend it a little bit more if you want. But that wire is not coming out of there now, no matter what you do to it. And now you have a little knitting tool, and the whole thing will cost you about $3.50, depending on how much tubing you buy. And that's it for today.